President Biden is calling on Congress to pass stricter gun laws following the two recent mass shootings in Colorado and Georgia that left 18 people dead. But he faces an uphill battle in the Senate. CBS News has learned that the Biden administration is exploring options to bypass Congress if needed. So Nancy Cordes is following the latest from the White House and is joining us. Nancy, what do we know about the president's plans? I'm wondering just how much leeway he has when it comes to bypassing Congress on something like this.
Well, advocates, Anne-Marie, say he actually has a lot of leeway. They say that he could immediately enact executive action that would, for example, close loopholes that enable unlicensed gun dealers to sell guns without performing a background check first, or that allow the sale of so-called ghost guns. These are essentially gun kits that you can put together yourself to make a deadly weapon, allowing those to be sold to people with a criminal record or a history of domestic violence, something that obviously they wouldn't be allowed to do with a regular gun. So that's something that advocates have been pushing for a while. It's something that the president himself and his vice president Kamala Harris suggested that they would be willing to do when they were on the campaign trail. But I'm told that while the White House is exploring the various options for the president, they also want to see if Congress can act first, because, of course, legislation tends to be more binding and last longer than executive action.
Exactly. You would think that President Biden would have sort of a basic blueprint, though, because after the shooting at Sandy Hook, former President Obama asked Mr. Biden, then his vice president, to come up with gun control measures. None of them passed in Congress, though. The way advocates tell it, it seems like, with the stroke of a pen, a lot of changes can be made. But what challenges does the president face if he wants to get anything done?
Well, the biggest challenge that he faces is that opposition from Republicans really has not changed much over time. The Democratic Party is more united on this issue than it has been in the past, but Republicans still, by and large, oppose most, if not all, gun safety measures. Some of them argue that those measures would be ineffective. Others argue that it's a slippery slope, and if you open the door to even minor reforms, then Democrats will charge through that door and try to pass more legislation. And the challenge for Democrats in the past has been that because they didn't control the Senate, they couldn't even get a vote on bills that passed the democratically controlled House because the Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, wouldn't bring those bills up. In fact, 2 years ago, he promised that there would be a big gun debate on the Senate floor after the El Paso Walmart shooting that left about 24 people dead. That never happened. Now, however, Democrats do control the Senate. And yesterday, the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, said that he will hold a vote on two background check bills that recently passed the House with about 8 Republicans supporting those bills. That doesn't mean that Democrats have the votes to pass these bills. They need 60, so at least 10 Republicans, maybe 11, because Democrat Joe Manchin of West Virginia said that he's opposed to the legislation. But at the very least, Anne-Marie, it forces these senators to take what could be a pretty difficult political vote for them, especially because we know that expanding background checks is broadly popular with the public, but the senators just haven't been forced to go on the record with an up or down vote for years.
Yeah, and if you want to sort of talk about sort of taking the temperature of Congress on this, members of the Senate Judiciary Committee addressed Monday's deadly mass shooting in Colorado during a previously scheduled hearing on gun violence. I want to play some of what was said.
Inaction has made this horror completely predictable. Inaction by this Congress makes us complicit.
Every time there's a shooting, we play this ridiculous theater where this committee gets together and proposes a bunch of laws that would do nothing to stop these murders.
Well, it certainly seems as if both sides, both parties are dug in on when it comes to their point of view on whether or not further restrictions on guns would make any bit of difference at all. So then I got to ask myself, the Democrats control both chambers. Is there a possibility that with that kind of muscle, they could pass legislation?
You know, the big question is whether there are Republicans, let's say, who are retiring or who are up for re-election in a couple of years in a swing state who might be compelled to vote for this legislation. We know where Republican leadership stands. They were very clear yesterday, from Mitch McConnell on down, that they don't think that this legislation would help. They think it's too expensive. They don't think that it solves the root problem. And they were arguing that all Democrats want to do is take away people's guns. And certainly the fact that the president himself came out yesterday and announced that he wants Congress to pass an assault weapons ban, going back to basically 90s era gun restrictions, kind of bolstered their case. Now, there were a lot of Democrats who were surprised that the president went this far. A lot of them were encouraged by the fact that he went that far. But it isn't that surprising when you consider that President Biden was in the Senate in the 90s, and he helped to pass the assault weapons ban. And there are many Democrats who still believe that there is no reason that anyone needs an assault type weapon and would like to see a return to the ban. So, yes, Democrats now have the power to control the agenda. They can put these bills on the Senate floor. Whether they can scrape together support from 10 to 11 Republicans, that is a very tall order, Emery. It would certainly represent a sea change on this issue.
Listen, before we let you go, I want to switch gears a little bit, bring up something that we talked about earlier in the show. The White House says that it will add a senior level liaison to its staff to represent Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. This comes after two Democratic senators vowed to block non-diverse nominees put forward by the administration until some changes were made. So both lawmakers have dropped their objections. But when I was reading about this story, I thought, well, what exactly will this role be? It's a senior member, but what do we know about what this position is supposed to accomplish?
It's very unclear, because this is something that Senator Duckworth appeared to work out with the White House in a series of phone calls yesterday. So we still don't have many details about what this individual would do, how senior they would actually be. But I can tell you from speaking to Senator Duckworth yesterday, she felt extremely strongly about this. In fact, she said that she teared up and got really emotional talking about it with senior White House officials because she's angry. In fact, she says she feels insulted by the fact that she has been told, hey, look, you've got Kamala Harris as vice president in the White House, because Kamala Harris is of Southeast Asian descent, essentially sort of to mollify her over the fact that there aren't any Asian Americans in senior positions at the White House now or in top cabinet level positions. Duckworth said that she has been passing lists of highly qualified Asian American candidates for various cabinet positions to the campaign, then the transition, then the White House for 6 months, and just growing increasingly frustrated by the fact that she didn't see any of them being placed in these top roles, to the point where she came out and issued this really unusual ultimatum yesterday, basically saying, I'm not going to vote for any non-diverse candidates for any cabinet positions or even lower level positions until the White House does better. Well, now apparently she feels that they have agreed to do better, starting with this senior level position. She says they've also made commitments about future cabinet positions that might open up. And that was apparently enough for her to drop a pretty potent threat that she was putting out there, because after all, as we've been talking about, in a very closely divided Senate, 50-50, if even one Democrat decides to vote against particular nominees, then that could mean that nominee can't get through. So apparently this was an ultimatum that caught the attention of the White House and got some results.
Yeah, and I'm sure that Senator Duckworth is going to keep the pressure up, because representation is one thing. Action needs to follow it. Nancy, thank you very much.
You're welcome.